welcome Milton Chen.
Wow, it's great to be here. And this is my first trip to Boise. I've only been to Coeur d'Alene in Idaho before for a conference, public television conference. And just so honored to be part of your Ed Sessions 2.0 and to learn more about the work of the Albertson Foundation. As someone who spent his entire life in nonprofits and more recently at the George Lucas Educational Foundation, we like to learn about interesting things going on around the country. That's the role that Edutopia plays. And years ago, I knew about the Albertson Foundation. I knew about the Albertson brand and supermarkets. We have them in California. So I said, isn't that interesting? That a family is supporting education with their wealth, with their philanthropy here in Idaho. So it was a nice connection. I'm so pleased to be here in person to meet the leadership here. That story about Caldwell, P16 in Caldwell, you need to bottle and sell that to districts around the country. That's exactly what's needed, that P16 approach, bringing together the different sectors. So I couldn't be more pleased and thrilled to be part of this session. We've also provided some Edutopia tote bags there. There's a little baseball game going on this afternoon in San Francisco. Some of you may be aware. And our colors are orange and black. So I feel like I'm at home here with the orange and black bag. So hope you enjoy that little token. And I'm so pleased to hear that we're using social media and streaming video to help promote this to a larger audience. How many of you are active on social media? Sort of using it every day? That's great, and most of you. And some of you are not. I see that, but not to worry, because I'm going to make this much simpler for you to use social media. I'm going to create a website that combines the best features of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. It's going to be really easy to use. It's going to be called UTwitFace. And it's going to be really easy. Just see me afterwards, and I hope you'll subscribe, and it'll be free, and just save yourself a lot of time. Yeah, I enjoyed Jimmy Fallon's line last night about the playoff game Saturday night at the Giants against the Nationals. Some of you may have seen it. It went on for 18 innings and 6 hours, and Jimmy Fallon said, so the San Francisco Giants went to Washington to play the Washington Nationals in a playoff game. It took 6 hours and 18 innings, thereby proving that even in sports, it takes forever to get anything done in Washington, D.C. So hopefully we're looking for a good result today. So I've titled my talk, What If Idaho Students Had the Edge? I've written a book that talks about 6 leading edges in education based on our work at the Lucas Foundation. And I like to say it's time to put the edge into education. For so long, education has been something, a system that's kind of self-perpetuated. You know, it's the fall, it's the middle, moving towards the middle of October, and you know, soon we'll be into Halloween and kids dressing up in costumes, and then we'll be into Thanksgiving and the holidays, and we'll go into the spring, we have testing, and then we end, do you end here in May, early June, most districts? A short academic school year. We have a very long summer vacation. The United States has one of the shortest school years of any industrialized country. We have one of the longest summer vacations. So the summer learning slide has now become well known. I'm glad that there are a number of things coming out of the research that we're all now familiar with. It doesn't come as a bolt of lightning to say that our kids lose learning over the summer. The research about it is quite interesting. That in reading, there are families who support their kids reading over the summer. They take their kids to libraries, they read to their kids, there's books in the home. There are families where there are no books in the home. The kids have very little reading over the summer. So that learning slide develops this gap between reading families and non-reading families, I'll put it that way. But in math, what's interesting is everybody falls behind over the summer. We don't do a good job generally as a public in encouraging our kids to do more math over the summer. Consequently, teachers know this, district administrators know this. We spend a lot of time in the fall remediating, trying to get kids to relearn in September what they already knew in June. Lost time is lost money. Therefore, we've got to recapture this learning and talk about, as you have in Caldwell, a wraparound system where kids get support in school, out of school, taking advantage of learning time after school, but also during the summer. I'm a big fan of summer learning and the creative things that can go on during the summer. So let's put the edge, make education a little more edgy, a little more special. Let's find what those active ingredients are, that yeast that can make the system grow and expand in new ways. Just a word about myself, my own learning journey and how I got here to be in front of you today, which is an extremely fortunate life and journey that I've been on. I got bitten by this bug around learning and innovation in learning very early when I was in college. I was still a teenager. I sometimes say I went to the right college for the wrong reason. I originally went to Harvard with a vague idea, as many kids go to college with a very vague idea of what you wanted to do, maybe working in public interest law. But there was a professor at Harvard named Gerald Lesser, who was one of the very few education professors interested in the role of television in education. You could count them on one hand. Television was horrible. It was, an entertainment medium. Some of you may remember television in the 60s and Sesame starting up around 68. But I met Jerry Lesser, and my first summer job was at Sesame Workshop. My first job out of college was at Sesame Workshop in New York, right across from Lincoln Center. So when you're there doing this work, formative research, testing out the segments with kids and reporting that back to the writers and the producers and the Muppeteers, it doesn't get any better than that. So I've been on this journey for more than 40 years. I've gone from the longest street in the world. Sesame Street is now seen in over 100 different countries in many languages. There's an Arabic version of Sesame Street, Iftaya Sim Sim. There's a Chinese version of Sesame Street shown in the People's Republic of China and Taiwan called Zhimajia, which means Sesame Street. In Portuguese, in Brazil, it's Vila Sésamo and Plaza Sésamo in Latin countries, and Spanish. So this is what we call the longest street in the world, and one of the things we're trying to do, I joined the board. It's great to work on the board of an organization where I worked 40 years ago. We're trying to bring all that back to the United States. We think that this global emphasis of what Sesame Street has done around the world, helping preschoolers learn the culture and the language of their own countries, could now, in this international age we're living in, be part of what it means to educate our own kids to be more global thinkers. I like to say the internet makes learning international. We couldn't do this without the internet, but with the internet we can now globalize and make available to our students here in Idaho, in the US, the world's knowledge. I did transverse to a galaxy long ago and far away. Thank you, Star Wars. I won't say a lot about the George Lucas Educational Foundation. Please look up George Lucas's own story of how he came to support education and a very different, more creative kind of education for kids at the Academy of Achievement website. I was saying earlier with the staff that all kids should know about achievement.org. It's where hundreds of really distinguished people tell their stories of their own lives, starting with what they were like as kids. And George was not a good student. I think some of you may be aware of his own personal story. He was kind of a student sitting in the back of class, wouldn't really talk much. You would have thought he was going nowhere, and through a circuitous set of events, he came to USC and attended film school. But it's been great to work with him and his vision, which is remarkably similar to Joan Cooney's, the founders of Sesame Street, about what media and technology can do to help activate kids' learning. Any Star Wars fans are glad there's new films coming out? Are you in the picture? There you go. So thank you for that cue, Roger.
You're welcome.
Can you see me in that picture? My hair was a little longer back then. We are actually standing on the Great Wall. Sometimes people look at this picture and say, is that a backdrop? So I'm standing next to that 8-foot-tall canary 30 years ago. My hair is a little longer. We are filming a co-production called Big Bird in China. It aired on NBC and on China Central TV in the early 80s, one of the first early co-productions between CCTV and US media companies. So now as I enter into the last decade of my own career, I'm very interested in fostering more exchange between the US and China. Educational exchange, business exchange. Been in the news with the Hong Kong Occupy the streets of Hong Kong. So you can see lots of ways in which this relationship could not go well, and you could see lots of ways in which you could build on what these two nations could do together. I think it's the most important relationship for both countries, and the most important relationship for the world, this bilateral relationship between the US and China. So maybe as we move to questions and answers, I'd be glad to learn more about your interest in Asia. And again, there are some great new ways of learning about content, language, culture of Asian countries. And I think a key to the future of Idaho may be around having students and a workforce that is globally competent and maybe creating, I'm sure there are some, but maybe some relationships with Chinese companies as well. So I wrote this book about our website, edutopia.org. I called it Education Nation. You'll see that it emphasizes how technology can power an education nation. I talk about these 6 edges of innovation. Changing our thinking is the most important thing, because we should be thinking about education very differently from when we were in school. The problem with education is we all went to school, and some of us did well in school and actually liked school. So when we talk about changing that, we say, oh, well, okay, we'll change, we'll maybe get some better teachers, and we'll maybe make this class size a little smaller. But it's still using that model of a school, a classroom, a teacher, and students, not really understanding the power of what is now available. And I'll talk a bit towards the end about some of my favorite websites. When you see them, they just scream out and want you to come learn about chemistry. I don't know how many of you are interested in chemistry or thought about chemistry since your high school chemistry class, but when you see this website called The Elements by Theodore Gray, it is a beautiful multimedia presentation of the periodic table of elements. So changing our thinking about what's now possible, about how time is used, that's the time-place edge, different learning places that are now possible for kids beyond the school building. I sometimes say that, you know this phrase, you need to think outside the box. Well, I say that schools need to think outside the building if they're going to think outside the box. That the learning that happens in the school building should not be the only learning, the only experiences that they have. So getting kids outside of the box of the building is important. That can happen during the after-school period, during summers, evenings, weekends. Rethinking curriculum and assessment, so important, especially the rethinking of assessment. If we change the tests, then we change everything else. Up until now, we've been doing a lot of work at Edutopia to say, here's a really creative classroom. Unless we change the tests, nothing much changes. Co-teaching, it's already been mentioned here, the idea of teaching across the learning day. After-school educators are co-teaching with teachers. Parents can become co-educators for their kids. And finally, really understanding what young people can bring to this now. This is the most difficult edge in terms of adults understanding that the younger generation coming through our schools are very different in how they think about themselves, how they think about their own learning. Or could be if we just help them understand what they can now do. One of the first things I learned at Sesame Street, and so I've been on this journey for so long, is that kids can learn a lot more earlier than we think. Believe me, when Sesame Street was launched for preschoolers, a lot of kindergarten teachers said, well, that'll never work. You wouldn't believe the trouble we're having with 5-year-olds when they come to our schools. They don't know their colors. They don't know their letters and numbers. There's no way television, kids watching television can do that. So I've been an advocate for more innovative approaches to all this. And the research from ETS, the Educational Testing Service, the first season of Sesame Street, 1968, showed that kids did learn their letters and numbers. They learned to count from 1 to 10. So the Sesame Street producer said, well, if they can do that, what about 1 to 20? Can they do that? Today, 45 years later, the curriculum for Sesame Street, and there is a curriculum behind the program, is for kids to learn to count from 1 to 40. And they can do it. So I'm also an advocate of really unleashing the powers of creativity and learning that kids naturally have. Sometimes they learn themselves out of that, but our job should be to surround them with confidence and support and understanding what they can now do. Here's our website. And you'll see educating parents about education right there on our homepage this very week. Our website is attracting more than 1 million visitors per month. About 25% of them come from other English-speaking countries, UK, Australia, Singapore. When we started building this website in the 90s, we were so excited when 5,000 people came to our website the first month. It was amazing. 5,000. Then it was 50,000 people, and now it's over 1 million every month. So importantly, the ability of users to see our films over the internet. We work for a filmmaker. We create documentaries about innovative schools. I remember Mr. Lucas saying, it was more than 10 years ago, maybe 15, in one of our board meetings saying, we should get ready for the day when people will see film over the internet. We said, wow, really? I mean, a web page is just sort of text, and maybe once in a while you see an image. You'll actually be able to show film over the internet. This was not that long ago. Do you remember when you saw your first film over the internet? It was about this big, like the size of a postage stamp. It's kind of grainy, maybe black and white. So it's just amazing that technology has continued to get better and better and faster and cheaper and cheaper. And about 10 years ago, once people, I'm measuring this by the birth of YouTube, which is not even 10 years old, that's when we began to see our website jump. People could begin to see these films. When I first talked about our films, the way in which we distributed our content, we didn't even have a website, was we made a VHS cassette and a book. And I would come to meetings like this and I'd say, we're doing this work, and in order to share this work, I've brought some boxes, and they're back there. And there's a VHS cassette. You can go home and put it in your VCR and watch this, and a book to give you more information about it. So it's amazing how quickly things have changed for the better, I think, in sharing innovation, in sharing what works. This is a great time to be involved in education. Khan Academy in Idaho. How fantastic. You're already working on this. We taped an early interview with Sal Khan. Just one example of what one individual can start to do. This is the key to all this, that every individual is now kind of amplified in what they're able to do because of these tools, because of this access to knowledge. Sal Khan, who began this work, what was he? He had a niece, a younger woman in his family who was having some trouble in math. So he started doodling a few things and sharing it over the internet. We taped an interview with him for our Big Thinker series. I love Sal Khan because most people, if they have a chance to meet with George Lucas, will drop everything and say, of course, I'd love to come to Skywalker Ranch and meet with George. Sal's response was, I'm kind of busy. I'm not sure I can make it that day. We got a lot of stuff going on here. So he's got the right mindset for this work. You can also see classrooms from around the world through a partnership with Pearson Foundation. I'd like to see foundations working together, providing their resources and their expertise to do bigger things than one of them can do on their own. That's the modern workplace. We work together in teams. Could foundations work together and do more and leverage their work? So we've created a partnership with Pearson, where some of the films from Canada, Singapore can be seen, Finland. I like to show this slide because around the world, I've had a chance to travel around the world presenting some of our work. There are cultures and countries, when you talk about an education nation, they think about themselves and their role with young people differently than we do at the very highest levels. I mean, not just the Minister of Education in a place like Taiwan or Singapore, but their Minister of Finance will say things like, in Singapore, we're a small country. We don't have a lot of natural resources. The real resources that we have are our people. So we want to educate our people to the highest levels. We're doing well as an economy. We want to do even better. So I just show you this image of currency from Singapore and from Taiwan, where when they thought about what they wanted to represent to themselves as a nation, they put up images of children learning, images of teachers teaching, students looking at a globe. Take a look at the images on our currency. I hope we get a chance to create some new currency. A lot of nations are moving to more secure currency. That's what happened here. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that conversation about the people in charge of designing the new currency and what images we would choose to put on our currency. But you can imagine there was a conversation at the highest levels of these countries saying, we've got a chance to create new currency, what do we put on them? Here's our strength. Because we are a bigger, more diverse nation than any of these other places that are doing extraordinarily well, Finland, Singapore, we're blending the formal school system with the informal opportunities outside of the school day. All the different United Way members who are providing help to the schools, the universities, our museums and libraries are the world's envy. Our universities as well. They are now getting more actively involved with school districts to widen and broaden the kind of learning that goes on, make it more creative. There's a federal agency, the Institute for Museum and Library Studies, IMLS, that funds this kind of innovative work in museums and libraries, and they're doing fantastic work. Churches, youth groups, national parks. I'm doing some work with the national parks. Keep your eyes for 2016, which will be the centennial of the national parks. You've got some great national parks here, historic parks, where kids can be learning in new ways, our most significant, important places as ecosystems, as historical sites. There are a number of agencies such as the national parks, America's favorite federal agency, I will point out, NASA, and the Smithsonian. 3 federal agencies that are saying our school system needs our help. We're creating online exhibits, online collections, experiences for students. When they're used in schools, it really, again, enlivens the teaching process. I think we're talking about a new day for learning that's 24/7, 365. Not just the typical school day, which is 6 hours by 5 days a week by 180 days, 6 by 5 by 180. Most countries, Canada, has a longer school year, 200 days, even moving towards 220, a full month or 2 months beyond what we're doing. So it's no wonder that we are falling behind in some of these international comparisons, but through this, there's a chance that we can extend the learning day and year for our students. We can talk about learning anytime, any place. I think you're familiar with that. But what about any path, any pace? I think that we can now take students. Mr. Lucas, as a young boy, was interested in cars and photography. But it was never anything the teacher said, you know, we can take that and make it into a project-based experience for you. Now you could. We can take students from their interests. I would argue in sports, we can get you to mathematics. If you're interested in the arts, we can get you to technology. There are multiple pathways through the world's knowledge that we can create based on kids' interests and based on their passions. And I think that's the next great hurdle. Can we acknowledge that kids have interests, we can give them new interests, and build more of a passion-based approach to learning? Can we also vary the pace at which kids learn? I know you're involved with blended learning. There's a great blended learning video, which a friend of mine is a teacher in 8th grade math. He says that in the traditional classroom, without technology, you would have to teach at the pace of the middle of the class. Imagine a class of 25 math students. You'd have to go towards the middle. The kids who are learning more quickly, you couldn't go faster. The kids who are learning more slowly, you couldn't slow it down. He says now, through blended learning, when every student has their own device, you can have each student go at their own pace. And you can accelerate the pace generally and accelerate it for kids who might be slower learners. So the thinking edge is the most important edge. And the way I'd like you to think about the thinking edge is think about the whole child. This is also something we haven't fully embraced because we've basically taught to the first 2 intelligences. But Howard Gardner at Harvard has talked about 8 different ways in which we're smart, the multiple intelligences. Not just the verbal and mathematical. What about the other 6? How are we honoring the other ways in which kids are smart? The visual. George Lucas was a visual learner. Most people think visually as well as verbally. So it's not that you're just good at 1 or 2, but you have strengths across the board, and how can we lift the intelligences that you may be less interested or less inclined towards? The musical intelligence, the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, people who are good with people who like to work with people. The intrapersonal, people who are good at knowing themselves. And what about that last one, the last intelligence that Howard Gardner added years later, the naturalist intelligence? Each of these intelligences located in the brain based on neuroscience, activated by musical learning, by verbal learning, by learning in nature. People who are good with plants and animals. I'm sure there are some of you in this room. That's a kind of intelligence, and we're trying to activate it through environmental learning, through learning in the national parks and state parks. School gardens are a great way to get kids involved with their naturalist intelligence. So here's what happens when we don't emphasize the other intelligences. Here lies Frederick Jones. Hopefully he was more than his SAT scores, which are pretty good, by the way. I'm sure he went to a good college and did very well. But moving beyond those two intelligences to the other 6. Here's a fun thing you can do. It takes 10 minutes of your time. Go home tonight and take the MI, Multiple Intelligences quiz at edutopia.org. It'll be just a quick and easy way of helping you gain a quick assessment. It's not that scientific, but it asks you a set of 25 questions. A lot of faculty are using this as a faculty professional development exercise to get them thinking about the ways in which they are smart and the ways in which their students are smart. No matter what we publish at edutopia.org, videos, lesson plans, stories about schools of the work, this MI quiz, month in and month out, is among the most popular things on our website because it's personal. It gives you a little insight into yourself as a learner. I don't know if you can read that. How much time do you spend from none to a lot, getting lost in a good book, doing crafts or arts projects, doing some things related to science? When I mentioned putting the edge into education, I also want to give you another E word, and I guarantee you this is the first time you've heard it in the same sentence as education. Education and ecstasy. Is that possible? That education could be so joyful, so motivating? Again, I'm thinking about the experience with Sesame Street that showed that kids could do this, but in a much more enlivened way. They're singing, they're dancing, they're repeating things back and forth. There's jokes, there's humor. There's parodies. One of my favorite ones is the Beatles parody. Instead of let it be, let her be. George Leonard wrote this book back in the 80s, and he was one of the very first to say this could be done in a different way. That when education works, it's because kids are powering their own learning. They're not just doing what the teachers and their parents and the adult system is telling them to do. They've somehow gotten that sense of curiosity, of passion, and they're powering their own learning. And now we can do that. In this book, and you can tell a little bit by the cover of it, George Leonard envisioned, he was an education writer for Look magazine. He was also an Aikido master, very interesting fellow. You'll see the beginnings of how technology, he envisioned that maybe technology could bring more of this to our students and make it more joyful and more ecstatic. So the curriculum edge, I also, in every talk I give, want to say something about social and emotional learning. Not just the academic learning you're all familiar with, but social and emotional learning. And this is a slide, an image of the different aspects of social and emotional learning. We've done a lot of coverage on this topic at edutopia.org: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, learning to communicate well. So I want to show you this short film. This film from Tucson brings together a lot of what I've talked about. Students who are learning to collaborate with each other, an innovative approach to teaching reading and language arts and writing for kids in Tucson, many of them English language learners. Often in innovation, we put together two ideas. When you first hear them, you don't believe that they go together. And so when I first heard this, that kids in Tucson are getting over the 4th grade reading hurdle by learning opera, I couldn't put that together. I said, how does that work? I mean, opera is something that you dress up for, and it's an adult thing. You go downtown. It's very expensive. It's usually sung in another language, by the way. How does that help kids learn to read? So this is where Edutopia and George Lucas is thinking about the power of film to explain these innovations. In 4 minutes, you'll learn more about this than I could possibly tell you. The other thing is that we have now implemented Google Translate on our films. Our films can be viewed in up to 60 different languages around the world through machine translation. So I'd like to ask any of you who are fluent in another language to tell me what the language is, and we will show you this film with captions in that language. And you don't have to be fluent. You can be learning a language, but yes. Thai. Okay. Our crack AV team will find it for you. So let's take a look at this. Are you fluent in Thai? Great. So afterwards, you can tell us how good Google's doing.
These first graders are learning all about opera. And with the help of professional singers and musicians, they're also becoming writers.
How does Papageno feel in the beginning of the story?
Thrilled.
Yeah.
Very good. And then how do they both feel at the end of our song? It means really, really happy. How do they feel?
Exuberant.
Exuberance. Very good.
At Corbett Elementary School in Tucson, Arizona, the arts enhance instruction in math, reading, writing, science, and social studies.
Sorry, what words do you use when you're at the end of the story?
Finally.
Finally.
The Arts Infusion program, now operating in more than 44 schools, is called OMA, Opening Minds Through the Arts.
Opening Minds Through the Arts is a program that utilizes the arts to boost student achievement and social growth, one that uses those tools in music, writing, visual arts, and dance to make connections for children that are related to their neurological development and to their social growth.
My donkey low, my donkey high, high, low.
OMA is based on brain research showing that the wiring of the left to the right side of the brain takes place between the ages of 4 and 12, a time when children learn from different forms of stimulation.
Is there something that we're making with ourselves that we're forming? Let's see, Esteban.
A pattern.
A pattern. What kind of pattern are we making?
A high-low pattern.
Maybe.
Music helps kindergarten children learn to listen.
Our very first shape today is a triangle. Hand on your hips. 1, 2.
Dance
Another
helps
triangle.
second graders learn geometry.
Now put your feet apart so you have a triangle in your legs.
Fourth graders study science while learning the violin.
Okay, how does humidity affect our instrument?
It makes the strings stick to the bridge.
And fifth graders express their creativity by composing music.
So now we need something that repeats. A rhythm that would be here, and then it would repeat here. and
Opening
repeat
Minds
here.
to the Arts really is an academic program that infuses the arts. Because we align it with the state standards, it gives another way for the brain to connect to what children are learning. And the more opportunities that children have to have tactile or physical or all of those responses that may be different than what we are used to learning with, the better they learn.
Mein Tür ist verschlossen, ich lass dich nicht ein.
Professional artists from the Tucson Opera, the Symphony, and the University of Arizona teach in each classroom twice a week.
Gute Nacht, gute Nacht, gute Nacht, mein Knab.
I always like to sing things in foreign languages so that it really helps the students to observe, and it puts the second language learners in the same boat as the English-speaking students because it's in a totally different language that no one knows.
Corbett Elementary is a neighborhood school in a working-class section of Tucson. 20% of its students are English language learners.
Like my house is dirty, I have to clean it up.
One of the things that the OMA program does, especially for our English language learners, is provide them with an art form that's connected to learning in a way that they can connect no matter what language they speak.
Does anybody know what this is called when we kind of...
Speak, sing like this.
Connect, no matter what language they speak.
Does anybody know what this is called when we kind of speak, sing like this? What do we...
Great. I'll just keep talking, and maybe if you want to download the video, or we can come back to it. But if we just go back to my slides, I'll say a few more things, and I've got another video coming up I'd like to show you. But you get the idea there, and you see that the students are using art to communicate. They're using it to express language. When that second grade girl says the word exuberant, it's not just a word on the page. She knows what it feels like. She knows what it looks like to be exuberant. So these kids are using their entire bodies to express language, and that's the key. That language and reading and writing shouldn't just be something that is just done on the page, but you learn to communicate using language. This idea of co-teaching, the co-educators from the opera, from the symphony, working with the teachers, again, expanding the expertise in the classroom. Teachers are one of the last places in the world, in the working world, where one person is tasked with the entire enterprise. In the working world, knowledge has gotten so specific, we need to work together in teams to do something more than an individual can do on their own. So that's the key thing we're trying to prepare kids for, working together in teams. We'd like to see teachers working together in teams. Some high school teachers will say, we used to do that. That was called team teaching 20 years ago. We don't do that anymore. So what happens when teachers are asked to do this on their own, individually, this culture of teaching that needs to change, where new teachers especially, in their first few years, should be mentored by other more veteran teachers, should be able to ask for help. I've heard new teachers say, you know, I was trained not to ask for help. I was told in my College of Education, we're training you to go in that room and close the door and teach. And if you ask others for advice, that's admitting weakness. And for veteran teachers to offer advice to a new teacher, that's a sign of arrogance. So this culture of teaching needs to shift, and it is shifting to more collaborative art form, teachers working together, and arranging the kind of experiences that you see here at the Opening Minds through the arts program in Tucson. I like this quote. It's that every child is born an artist. The trouble is to remain an artist as you grow up. Sometimes we educate ourselves out of creativity, out of the arts. Sir Ken Robinson has a great TED Talk. It's, I think, still the most popular TED Talk. How many of you have seen Sir Ken's talk? Yeah, it's great to be able to come here, and then most people have seen that. Do you remember the part where he says, somehow we've gotten into just teaching kids from the neck up. We've forgotten that they have a body, and that if they use their body to learn, I like to say kids need to come to their senses in their learning. They need to use all of their senses in their learning. Full body, whole child learning, that's what will get us there. Are there any professors here, actually? Do you remember Sir Ken's? Oh, good. There's no professors here. Good. Sir Ken says that, you know, and proof of this is a university faculty. Because university faculty are just using their bodies as a way of transporting their brains to meetings. That's all they use their bodies for. We don't want that to happen. We want to use our bodies to learn. So here's one of our favorite projects also, changing the curriculum, getting kids into nature. I don't know about here. You're in a more agricultural region than we are in San Francisco, although you just go 2 hours into the Central Valley, you see the farms. There are kids in high school who are graduating high school who have never put their hands in dirt. They've never grown anything. So here's a project, a school garden, called the Edible Schoolyard. This was developed by Alice Waters, a well-known organic chef from the Bay Area. It's called the Edible Schoolyard because it's more than a school garden. The kids not only grow vegetables and produce, they also learn to cook. When you mentioned kids learning to swim, there are things that kids can learn that activate their bodies and connect to the rest of their interests and develop new interests based on that. So Alice Waters calls this a complete seed-to-table experience. If I had time, I would show you this film. What's interesting about this film is how much young boys want to learn how to cook. So it's cutting against stereotypes. As she says, this is a delicious revolution. Maybe we're making this too difficult. When I worked at Sesame Workshop, we produced a science program. Some of you may remember it. I'm looking at this audience. Some of you were in the target audience of 8 to 12-year-olds in 1980 when this was broadcast on PBS. It was called 3-2-1 Contact. As part of the formative evaluation, again, beginning to develop the curriculum for this program, we did a simple thing. We just went out and talked with 8 to 12-year-olds. And we just asked them, what questions do you have about the world? You're 8 years old. You've lived on this planet for 8 years. You're 10 years old, same thing. Do you have any questions? What are you curious about? It was amazing the questions that kids asked, and here are some of them. Why do people get sick? How do we talk? Things that we take for granted. How do we talk? How do animals talk? Is it true that animals can talk and communicate? How do they do that? I love the way in which they phrase some of these questions. How does your body know when it's time to grow? How tall am I going to be? A lot of questions about how things are made, things that we take for granted. Everything that we see around us was made by somebody. And how do things work? How does a camera work? How does the TV work? If kids could just begin to investigate the questions that they naturally have, their own curiosity, that would lead to more powerful learning. We don't even need a so-called science curriculum or stuff. Just start with interests that kids have. This interest-based, interest-driven learning. MacArthur Foundation sometimes calls it interest-driven learning. But if we were to enable kids to own their own interests, we could begin to have them do this kind of project-based learning. This could not have been done without technology. Could not have been done, maybe. You go into a school library, begin to research these questions. Not easy. You go into a public library. Now you just type in some of these questions and you're off and running. I'll just ask you this simple question to show you how far we've gotten down this road with actually investigating things that we experience every day. One simple question that was asked to Harvard graduates on the day of their graduation became a whole project. Are there some graduates in this room? Why is it hotter in the summer and colder in the winter? And there you see a young Harvard senior. Most people, I'll tell you that what you're thinking, most of you, is not the correct answer, that somehow we're closer to the sun during the summer and then farther from the sun during the winter. That's not the way it works. So again, through the internet, you type in this question and you will find the answer very quickly. We can accelerate this kind of learning. Here's a little clue. Why, when it's summer here in Boise, is it winter in other countries? And why in December is it summer in some countries and is it winter here? That's a little clue. Where are those countries? And that will get you thinking about the hemispheres. The technology edge, I think you're pretty familiar with it, the ways in which it can change and revolutionize education. I like to talk about time for weapons of mass instruction. This is the key to learning for all students around the globe now, trying to provide these devices and the access to the internet. There's an article there about California schools embracing blended learning. I know that some of your teachers have had a chance to visit Summit Prep and Rocket Ship and some of the groups doing this. School to Home is one of our efforts in California to provide these devices to low-income students. We have many of them in urban places and rural places around California. And actually, if you look at that film, at School to Home, there's a video there, you will see the way in which they use Google Translate to translate the school's communications to parents who speak other languages. Again, in up to 60 different languages. How was the tie, by the way?
Good. Good. There's a few extra characters in there. Didn't understand the German song, but other than that,
what percentage of fluency, or would you say? Is it 70%, 90%? Yeah, it's not bad. It's actually much better in Spanish and some of the Romance languages, less good in some of the Asian languages, but for machine translation in real time, It's better than it used to be, and it's just going to get better and better. So maybe 80, 85%. So this becomes a language learning tool. It's a great thing that teachers can use with their, what student wouldn't want to go on that and find the mistakes that Google's making? Wouldn't that be fun? But here in this film, you'll see a Spanish-speaking mother say in Spanish, wow, for the first time I can understand what the school is trying to accomplish. I can read it in Spanish. I can send back my questions and comments in Spanish. It's translated back into English. It's a way of getting the parents back involved with their kids' education. Here's one of the most important things that happened last year, an NPR report in December, closing the word gap between rich and poor. Again, I recommend it to you. You can find it at NPR. Just type in word gap. 5 minutes of your time, maybe. It talks about the 30 million word gap that appears by the time kids are 3, before they even arrive at our schools. Some kids, by the age of 3, have heard 30 million more words than other kids. How is this possible? Not only the amount of words, but the kinds of words, the positive versus negative kind of speech they're receiving. It turns out that better educated parents talk to their kids a lot more. I'm sure some of you in this room have done that with your kids. But also, you're doing more positive things. You're directing them to things. You're saying, that's really good, let's look at this. You're good at this, let's try that. Less educated parents tend to be more punitive with their kids and say, don't do that, stop doing that, you're not doing that well. So changing that dynamic before the kids even show up in school, in some ways what we are doing is remediating the 30 million word gap between the ages of 0 and 3, trying to do that in our schools. This report talks about the way in which technology can help with that. New technology, a little wearable device. This is moving towards things that we will wear that generate data about what we're saying, what we're doing, hopefully educational data that we can learn and reflect back to us. We sometimes call this the missing mirror in education. We haven't had a way of looking at ourselves and seeing what we're doing. But technology can record that and play it back to us. A little device, I think there's a little picture of it there, called Lena, the digital language processor, and a little vest, some overalls that these little kids wear. And that little wearable device records the words that child is hearing. And it sends reminders to the parents. I call it a word pedometer. And if you use the Fitbit or a pedometer, it says, oh, you've only walked 6,000 steps today. You're supposed to do 10,000, time to do some more. So parents, get that data and then start talking with their kids more. And in the NPR report, there are examples of parents who say, this is great, to remind me of what my child has heard. Sometimes they're in preschool, I haven't even been with them. Now I can go and reinforce and talk with them some more. Just some quick websites that change everything about what we can do. Thank you, Google, again, for doing the art project. Using Google Street View technology, you've seen some of the vehicles with those cameras pointing in all directions, riding up and down the streets, mapping the world. They said, why don't we put those cameras on bicycles and ride them up and down the galleries of the world's greatest art museums? You can now transport yourself virtually to the world's great art museums, not just travel up and down the Rijksmuseum or the Museum of Modern Art, but also become a curator of your favorite works of art. You can collect them, you can annotate them, you can share them. Kids can do this. So again, kids can begin to experience what it's like to become a museum curator. This is my favorite table of periodic table of elements, the periodic table. There's element 22, which I'm very grateful for. It's in airplanes, the lightest and strongest metal. But if you go to this site, you will see, again, this beautiful artistic way of learning about the elements. It will make you want to learn more, and that's the good test of a good lesson. BugScope. Your students here can schedule a scanning electron microscope at the University of Illinois, thanks to the National Science Foundation. One of the earliest stories we profiled were kids who were doing something similar, but without the internet. They had a very expensive video conferencing system. From their classroom to San Diego State, they collected insects and sent them to San Diego State. And they got online and talked with scientists and saw their insects under a scanning electron microscope, very high magnification. How thrilling to be an 8 or 9-year-old to see this. Again, real science, real art, and art history, putting students in the role of what professionals do. So please, take up that project. Ways of learning language. Mi Vida Loca, My Crazy Life, taught through a dramatic serial. If any of you are watching some of these popular dramatic serials on TV, what if you were to adapt that format for teaching language? You can learn Spanish. Thank you, BBC, one of the world's great educational television broadcasters, put their telecourses online for free to learn these different languages. The Academy of Achievement, this website where very distinguished Americans tell their stories. I want to pay homage to Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. You'll see her telling her story. And I mentioned earlier that she thought about being a professional tennis player. She was that good in high school in Southern California. But she studied engineering and then went on to notice a little job opening in the student newspaper that NASA was looking for astronauts. So George Lucas's story, Frank Gehry's story as an architect, you just assume these people were always so great at what they did, but that's not true. They encountered the same kinds of obstacles, failures, Frank Gehry failing his first course in architecture, then taking it over again, George Lucas experiencing no success during the first 5 years of his life, and then coming up with this idea for a children's science fiction fantasy film for 10-year-old boys in 1975, and saying to Fox, you know, I got this idea for this film, and it's for 10-year-old boys, and this is the Watergate era, this is post-Vietnam, and Fox says, well, it's true you had one great hit, American Graffiti, but we're not sure about this movie, so would you invest in it? We're going to finish it up and put it out there. Memorial Day 1977, some of you may remember where you were. Lines around the block. I was driving down Boylston Drive in Boston, and there's 2 words on the marquee, Star Wars, and a line around the block, and I remember driving and saying, what is that? So yes, this little science fiction fantasy film was sold to Disney for several $1 billion. New films coming out next year. That's a good thing for Star Wars fans. Guru Learning, trying to make educational search engines. If you ever typed in some topics into some of the search engines and you don't get back the results that you're looking for, especially if you're an educator, what you're looking for are lesson plans, content that you can share, PDFs. Guru, you can tell by the logo there, an Indian engineer at Google who said, I can create a better search engine for education. It's a great title, Guru Learning. So try this out, a search engine for learning. Wolfram Alpha, a computational search engine, tells students the answers to questions that they're trying to compute, and then raises the question, why is this the right answer? It's easy to get the answers. The important thing we now want for students is deeper learning about why are those the right answers. What does that mean? Oh, the edge of time and place and getting kids into different places where they can learn, extending the learning day. I was part of this Mott Foundation group. Charles Stewart Mott, a founder of GM. I'm interested in the history of these foundations and how these founders came up with these ideas. But back 100 years ago, Charles Stewart Mott was a founder of GM and had parents working in the GM factories 24 hours a day. And he said to the school district, I need these parents to be working after 3 o'clock when you close. Could you come up with some after-school programs for these kids to keep them busy until their parents come home? He became the mayor of Flint, Michigan in order to advance after-school learning a long time ago. Here's a great website, and I'm glad to share these slides with you. A great compendium of research and best practices on extended day, out-of-school time learning. We're beginning to develop the research base for the outcomes of when kids are learning around the clock. Some webinars that Alliance for Excellent Education has put on about learning in a learning time, using learning time differently, reorganizing the school day. Summer of Learning in Chicago, Mayor Rahm Emanuel has organized the entire city to provide that 3rd semester of learning for students. The Co-Teaching Edge we talked about, and getting other experts, including parents, to be part of this learning enterprise. And this last edge about youth. Sam Levin was here for the Think Challenge over the weekend. This is his project from Western Massachusetts, the independent project. Could students, high school students especially, organize their own learning? Again, it would be hard to do this without the availability of these resources now online, but now we've brought an entire wealth of resources to kids. Could they do that? So I recommend his project to you. And lastly, a 13-year-old, Quinn from the Central Coast of California, who was fortunate to be born into the right family because 3 years ago when he was 10 and in 5th grade, his father took him to the Maker Faire in San Mateo, the original Maker Faire. And it's amazing how the maker movement is growing. So new tools that students can use when they're still in elementary school to really change the nature of their learning. And this is the last film I'd like to show you. Let's take a look at Quinn. Just a few minutes.
My name is Quinn and I live on the Central Coast of California. I really like to do embedded electronics, soldering, hacking, 3D printing, and laser cutting. It's really cool seeing your project come to life. I used to do a lot of Lego stuff, like taking things apart, and a computer is something that you can easily take apart and sometimes not as easily put it back together. And so I got an interest in that, and I went to the Maker Faire in San Mateo in 2011 with my dad, and so there I got my first Arduino. This is the Arduino. This is the main board, the Uno, and this is the Make Edition for the Maker Faire. So here I'm using my phone, and when I text it a certain command, like LED on, then it goes through the internet and comes back to the Arduino. The main thing that's special about this is that you can program it to do whatever you'd like. You can attach sensors such as light sensors and attach it also to LEDs or motors. Everything's open source, which means you can get everything for free online, and one by one I went online and looked at tutorials, and that's how I learned. This is a Weevil eye kit. I used a soldering iron and some solder to solder the kit, and basically solder is electric glue. And so I bond the circuits together using the solder, and thus the wires would be connected inside this board. This could be used as a night light, so when the room is darker, then the lights would turn on, and as it went darker, then the lights would be brighter.
Well, I didn't know anything about the maker movement until I heard about Quinn. And it's pretty fun when you have a gem right there in your own district. It's pretty cool to have a student who's that curious and that into learning on his own, basically.
This is filament. This is a soldering iron. This is a Leatherman. These are solder supplies. These are breadboards. These are Arduinos. And this is my 3D printed logo.
Quinn came to one of our school board meetings and he talked to the school board about what he does with Arduinos and all those circuit boards and things, and really gave us his thoughts on how we need to be more engaging as a school district.
The 3D printer that I have is called a BucoBot. So here's the filament, and it's basically a spool of plastic, and it has the spool holder too. It goes all the way down into here, and this is the main extruder part. And so basically it melts it, and it spits it out in the nozzle. This axis is the x-axis, so it moves side to side. This is the y, and right here and right here are the z-axis, and so these move up and down. First, you take your 3D model from tinkercad.com and download it into your host program. Then you slice it using the program called Slicer, and this basically turns the 3D model code into 3D printer code. And so the 3D printer code is basically a set of X, Y, and Z coordinates that my computer tells the 3D printer to do. Layer by layer, it prints a 3D object with filament.
The power, I think, of the maker movement is they're really focused on building something that they think is cool. They're not like, well, here's a math problem, you need to learn it. No, here's a cool project, and I want to build that project. Oh, and by the way, I need to learn about electricity and engineering principles. They're learning all these STEM kinds of things that are going to be helpful to them later on, but they're learning it in the context of something that's fun and interesting to them.
The hackerspace, I was teaching my friends how to solder, as well as teaching them how to use the tinkercad.com software to design their own keychain and 3D print it. Click on the box and change the one that goes up and down to 5, or actually to 3. I really like to teach other people how to do embedded electronics and Arduino and stuff like that, because once I teach them, they can teach some of their friends, and that overall makes the maker community bigger, and everybody can help each other. Is it working?
Yeah.
Nice.
So I've noticed it looks like that thing always stays in the same place, and then that board moves around.
Yeah, exactly. So the x-axis is like that, y is like that, and then z is.
I'm interested in this idea of maker spaces finding their way into schools and transforming a number of things. You know, the art studio connected to the computer lab, connected to the shop class, connected to the biotech lab. But the difference is, instead of directing students to do things, you're inviting them to create things and make things.
The self-confidence and sense of self-efficacy that I think students get from creating their own projects and seeing them be successful and seeing that they can do it, that I think is so powerful.
We are defined very much by our culture as
So I think in the interest of time, we'll move
users
along, but I think you get the sense of what just this one boy, and there are many more like him out there, boys and girls, who are becoming part of this maker movement, maker spaces coming into schools and also into libraries, museums, the Chicago Public Library. If you're ever in Chicago, please go to the downtown branch, the main branch, where they've created a makerspace. What's interesting about that is there are people of all ages, from 6 to 60 in there. And it's especially being used by adults to learn new skills to help them get their next job. That this is a place that's free. It's the new version of the public library. Thank you to Andrew Carnegie. What about the next version of that, the Public Library 2.0, that is a digital learning collaborative space? Brian Bannon is the commissioner there at the Chicago Public Library. This makerspace in downtown Chicago was so successful, and it's great to see 60-year-olds teaching 16-year-olds and vice versa, breaking down the age barriers around learning. They couldn't shut it down after a 6-month pilot. It was so popular, and the people were learning so much and getting jobs, modern jobs, and Motorola came in and said, this is what we want. We will fund this and keep this open. So that's just one example of the new kinds of learning environments we're creating. I'll close with just this simple question. What's your definition of a great school? I was asked this question by Paul Houston, who was with the American Association of School Administrators, the Superintendent's Association in DC. He said, I've seen your website, it's full of great schools. How do you define a great school? And could you make it short? Because in education we tend to talk a lot, and maybe I've talked too much today. But make it concise, just a sentence or two, a definition, and how would you measure that? That's what we want to know. It's not just you saying it, but do you have some results on what this would actually indicate about students' learning? And of course, I was going on a bit about a great school. I've been to these places. There's this culture of leadership. There are parents who are active in the school. There are kids who want to be there. He said, well, that's getting a little long. How would you measure that? And I said, wow, you know, we've got so much to do with new measurement systems. The tests don't measure everything. Maybe they're helpful tests and quizzes, but they shouldn't be high-stakes tests. He said, okay. Here is his definition of a great school. It's just one sentence. Do the children run in at the same rate they run out? That's it. We could measure this. We could have saved ourselves a lot of time under No Child Left Behind if we tried to measure this. I live near a school. I see this every day. The young kids are racing ahead of their parents to get to school, the kindergartners, the first graders. By 5th and 6th grade, the parents are ahead of the kids. And at the end of the school day, kids are racing out there at the final bell. In the schools that we've profiled, when the school day ends, the parents are waiting in line. The kids say, you can imagine someone like Quinn saying, you know, I'm working on this thing right here. I'm making a presentation. We're going to do something. Could you just wait for 15 minutes while I finish this up? So that's what you want. And as I said, I'm just so pleased to share these ideas. I know that you're doing a lot to bring this new learning landscape into clearer view here in Boise and throughout Idaho. You're part of a national movement. This work is going on and really getting more lift. So I couldn't be more thrilled to be here and share these ideas. So thank you for your attention, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments.
Thanks, Milton.
Thank you.
So we went over.
Oh, we did.
Matt, you and I'll take the blame too. We went over
No,
today.
it's my problem too.
So here's what we'd like to do. Normally for you newcomers, we usually leave about 10 to 15 minutes and we collect your questions and we ask the speaker. We're not going to do that today because we know you all have busy schedules. But if you could, write your questions down. We'll collect them. We'll put them on our website. The other thing is too is Milton will stick around a little bit after the presentation today. Feel free to stick around and ask him whatever question you might. How long are you staying?
Oh, I'm here till 4, I think.
Next week? You're here all week?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyways, we're going to wrap it up now. So thank you for being here today. I want to give you a heads up about next month in Ed Sessions. So for November, we're going to do something different. Do you know that we've had 19 Ed Sessions so far? We've heard from a lot of folks about a lot of really cool things. So next month, we're going to take a little detour and we're going to round a few of you up and we're going to talk about those and really help us shape our direction of where we go with Ed Sessions. Is there such a thing as 3.0? Is it? Okay, the next step of Ed Sessions. So look for an invitation. Look to see what comes out of that, and we'll keep you posted. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Ed Session. And thank you so much for being here today. And Milton, thanks for a great presentation.
Thank you.
You can stay here, or you can leave. You can do whatever you want. Thank you.